Hello, everyone. My name is Kaylee, and today I want to share a story with you. It's a story about love, betrayal, and discovering a strength I never knew I had. He sat across from me in that sterile courtroom, a smug little smile playing on his lips as he signed the divorce papers with flourish. He thought he had won. He thought he had taken everything. But as the judge cleared her throat and read the final line from my father's will, I watched that smug smile melt from his face, replaced by pure, unfiltered shock. His world, the one he had so carefully constructed at my expense, was about to come crashing down. Before I get into the details of how it all fell apart for him, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us create more stories for you. And I'd love to know where you're all watching from, so drop your country in the comments below. Our story, or rather my story, really begins 3 years ago. I was a completely different person back then. I was married to Marcus Chen, a man who seemed to have stepped right out of a magazine. He was a high-flying investment banker, handsome, charming, and from a family that had money for generations. We met at a charity event. I was there with a friend from work. I was a high school English teacher. Just trying to make a difference and barely making ends meet, especially after losing my dad the year before. Marcus, he just swept me off my feet. There were whirlwind dates, fancy dinners where I couldn't even pronounce the names of the dishes, and grand gestures that left me breathless. He made me feel like the most special woman in the world, like a real-life Cinderella. So when he proposed just 6 months later with a diamond ring that probably cost more than my car and a year's salary combined, I said yes without a second thought. I truly believed I had found my Prince Charming. But the thing about fairy tales is that they often leave out the parts that come after happily ever after. The cracks started to show in small ways, little things that I brushed off at first. Marcus would talk about my job with this sort of amused tone. He'd call it cute that I wanted to help the kids. When I'd get excited about a student's breakthrough or an essay they wrote, he'd just pat my hand and chuckle, as if their small victories were insignificant compared to the multi-million-dollar deals he was closing. I remember once telling him I wanted to go back to school to get my master's, maybe become a principal one day. He just smiled that condescending little smile and said, "Oh, sweetheart, why would you want to add all that stress? I make more than enough to take care of us both." At the time, I convinced myself he was just being protective, that he wanted me to have an easy life. I didn't see it for what it was: control. After we got married, it got worse. More obvious. He loved hosting these lavish dinner parties for his colleagues and their equally wealthy wives. When someone would inevitably ask me what I did, he'd chime in before I could even open my mouth. "Oh, Kaylee's just a teacher," he'd say with a wave of his hand. "She keeps herself busy with that while I handle the real work." The way he said it, just a teacher, it was like a tiny dagger to my heart every single time. I felt myself shrinking, becoming smaller and smaller in my own home, in my own life. If I ever tried to join in on conversations about finance or politics, Marcus would cut me off with a patronizing, "Sweetheart, let the adults handle this, okay?" His friends would let out these little chuckles, and I'd just mumble an excuse and retreat to the kitchen, my cheeks burning with humiliation. But the cruelest part was how he treated the memory of my father. My dad was my hero. He passed away from a sudden heart attack when I was just 25, and it shattered my world. He was a simple man, a maintenance supervisor at a local manufacturing plant. He didn't have a fancy title or a big bank account, but he had a heart of gold. He was the kindest, most hardworking person I knew, and he loved me with every fiber of his being. Marcus, on the other hand, seemed to find my background almost amusing. He would constantly make little jabs about it. "It's really sweet that your father was blue-collar, Kaylee. Not everyone is born to be successful like my family." It was his way of reminding me that I had married up, that I was lucky he'd even looked my way. When I'd get sad, especially around the anniversary of Dad's passing, Marcus would just sigh with this air of impatience. "Kaylee, you really need to move on from that. Wallowing in the past isn't going to change where you came from." He just didn't get it. He couldn't understand that my father had taught me things money could never buy. He taught me that your worth isn't tied to your job title or the size of your house. It's measured by your integrity, your character, and the positive impact you have on the people around you. It was a lesson Marcus, with all his wealth and privilege, would never comprehend. About 2 years into our so-called perfect marriage, the facade really started to crumble. The late nights at the office became more and more frequent, or at least that's what he claimed they were. His phone was constantly buzzing at all hours, and he'd snatch it up, quickly angling the screen away from me before stepping into another room to reply. The man who once couldn't get enough of me now seemed barely to notice I was in the same room. The romance was gone, replaced by cold, silent distance. I knew, deep down, that something was terribly wrong, but a part of me was too scared to admit it. I kept making excuses for him, telling myself he was just under a lot of pressure at work. To cope, I poured all my energy into my job. School became my sanctuary. There, I wasn't just a teacher. I was Miss Kaylee, someone who mattered. My students didn't care about my background or who I was married to. They cared that I listened, that I believed in them, that I advocated for them when no one else would. I remember one student in particular, a bright girl named Maria. Her home life was a mess, and her grades were plummeting. I refused to let her fall through the cracks. I spent countless hours after school tutoring her, helping her find resources, and just being a stable adult in her life. When she got accepted into her dream college on a full scholarship, she came to my classroom with tears in her eyes and gave me the biggest hug. She said, "Miss Kaylee, you saved me. You never gave up on me." It was moments like that, they were my lifeline. They reminded me of who I was beneath the shell of the person Marcus was trying to turn me into. But then I'd go home and I'd disappear all over again. Marcus had done such a good job of breaking down my confidence. He'd convinced me I was lucky, that no other man of his stature would ever want someone as simple and plain as me. "You should be so grateful I saw something in you, Kaylee, despite everything," he'd say. And the saddest part is, I started to believe it. The final, shattering blow came on a Tuesday night. I'd just come home from a parent-teacher conference feeling on top of the world. I had managed to help a family get their son, who had been struggling, back on the right track. I was actually excited to tell Marcus about it. As I walked toward his study, I heard him laughing on the phone. "Trust me, David," he was saying, his voice dripping with amusement. "She has no idea. She is so delightfully naive, it's almost adorable. She actually thinks I married her for love." His laugh echoed down the hall, a cold, sharp sound that sent a chill through my entire body. I froze, hidden in the shadows of the hallway. "Of course I have a prenup," he continued, his tone turning serious. "Do you take me for a fool? When this is all over, she gets next to nothing, and I get everything. The house, the investments, and best of all, that useless piece of land her father left her. I got her to sign it over as collateral for our mortgage. She thinks it was just a formality. She has no clue what it really means." My heart hammered against my ribs. I couldn't breathe. "She's been so easy," he went on, and I could hear the smirk in his voice. "A few expensive trinkets, a couple of fancy vacations, and she handed over her entire life on a silver platter. The best part? She genuinely believes I love her." He listened for a moment, then burst into another round of cruel laughter. "You're right, David. I deserve an Oscar for this performance. 3 years of pretending to be in love with someone so incredibly boring and ordinary. But trust me, the payout will be well worth it." I stumbled back, my hand clamped over my mouth to stifle a sob. Everything clicked into place. The late nights, the secret phone calls, the way he'd been casually pushing legal documents in front of me to sign, saying they were for our taxes or insurance. He had been playing me from the very beginning. It was never a fairy tale. It was a long con. That night, I lay in our bed, stiff as a board, listening to the steady sound of his breathing. He was sleeping peacefully, without a care in the world, while my world had just been burned to the ground. The man I had given my heart to, the man I had trusted with my entire future, had seen me as nothing more than a pawn in his greedy game. The next morning, he kissed my forehead before he left for work. "Have a good day at school, sweetheart," he said, his voice laced with that fake tenderness I now saw right through. The moment the door closed behind him, I called in sick to work. I couldn't face my students, not when I felt like such a complete and utter fool. I needed to think. I needed a plan. I spent the entire day locked in his study, our study, pulling out every financial document I could find. What I discovered was even worse than I had imagined. He had been meticulous. He had systematically entangled and then seized control of every asset we had. The house, which I thought was ours, was in his name alone. Our joint bank accounts were structured in a way that gave him total control, while any large withdrawal I tried to make required his signature. And then I found them, the papers, copies of legal documents I had signed without a second thought. Reading them now, with the cold clarity of betrayal, I saw them for what they were. I had signed away my rights to almost everything, including my father's land, the one tangible thing he had left me. A week later, just as I was beginning to piece together a strategy, Marcus came home with a bouquet of my favorite lilies. He was being overly attentive, which I now knew was a massive red flag. "Kaylee, darling," he said, sitting next to me on the couch and taking my hands, "I think we need to talk." "Oh, what about?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. He put on his most serious, compassionate face. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about our marriage, and, well, I think we both know it's not really working anymore, don't we?" I just stared at him, marveling at his audacity. He was going to pretend this was a mutual decision. "What do you mean?" I feigned confusion. "Oh, come on, Kaylee, we're adults. We've just grown apart. We want different things from life. I think it would be for the best if we went our separate ways." "You want a divorce?" I whispered, as if the thought had never crossed my mind. He nodded solemnly, rubbing my hand in that fake, comforting way of his. "I know it's difficult, but I've already had my lawyer draw up the papers. We can make this very simple, very painless. I'll take care of all the legal fees. You won't have to worry about a thing." "How generous," I said, my voice dripping with irony that flew right over his head. He pulled a thick manila folder from his briefcase. "It's all very straightforward. All you have to do is sign, and we can both start fresh." I looked at the folder, then back at him. "What about the house, Marcus?" "Well, it is in my name, and I did put up all the capital, but don't worry, the settlement is quite generous. You'll have enough to find a nice little apartment." "And my father's land?" I asked, my voice quiet. His eyes flickered for just a second. "Kaylee, we've discussed this. That land is tied up as collateral for the mortgage. Legally, it's a marital asset now, but like I said, the settlement will take care of you." He was lying so smoothly, so convincingly. If I hadn't heard that call, I would have believed him. I would have signed those papers and walked away with scraps while he cashed in on my life. "I need some time to think," I said, buying myself a few more precious days. His smile tightened. "Of course, sweetheart, but my lawyer advises the sooner we file, the better." That night, I didn't sleep. I read every single word of his generous divorce papers. As I expected, I was being offered a pittance, just enough to keep me afloat for a year or two. He, on the other hand, would walk away with everything: the house, the cars, the investments, and, of course, the deed to my father's land, which the agreement stated would be sold to cover, quote, marital debts, with all proceeds going to him. He was going to leave me with nothing. But as I sat there, surrounded by the evidence of his betrayal, I wasn't just heartbroken anymore. I was angry. A deep, cold anger that burned away the fear. He had underestimated me. He thought I was just a simple, boring teacher. He was about to find out just how wrong he was. The next day, I didn't wallow. I acted. I took another personal day and drove to a downtown law office. I had gotten a referral from a colleague for a divorce attorney named Margaret Willis. She was a woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. I sat in her office and told her everything, from the fairy tale beginning to the nightmare phone call. I laid out the documents, the prenup, the divorce settlement he wanted me to sign. She listened patiently, nodding occasionally, her expression unreadable. When I finally finished, my voice hoarse, she looked at me over the top of her glasses. "Kaylee," she said, her voice firm but not unkind, "I'm going to be straight with you. If you sign these documents he put in front of you over the years, this is going to be an uphill battle. His lawyers have covered their bases." My heart sank. "So that's it? I lose everything?" "Not necessarily," she said, leaning forward. But we have to be smart. We have to be strategic. Tell me more about your father's land. You said it was the only thing he left you in his will? I nodded. Yeah, it's not much. Just a few acres of empty land out in the country with a dilapidated old barn. To be honest, I never even knew why he bought it. He never did anything with it. Margaret tapped her pen on her legal pad. Kaylee, have you ever had that land professionally appraised? Do you have any idea what its actual current market value is? I shook my head. No, Marcus always said it wasn't worth much, that it was perfect to use as collateral because it had low value. A small, knowing smile touched Margaret's lips. I think our first step should be to get that land appraised quietly. And while we're at it, I want to do a deep dive into your father's finances. You'd be surprised what can turn up in cases like these. What do you mean? I asked, confused. What could there be? My dad was a maintenance man. Sometimes, she said, her eyes twinkling with a hint of something I couldn't quite place, the quietest people have the biggest secrets. I left her office feeling a sliver of hope for the first time in weeks. Still, I was skeptical. My father was a good man, but a rich man? It seemed impossible. 2 weeks later, my phone rang. It was Margaret. Kaylee, are you sitting down? Because I have some news that is going to change everything. My breath caught in my throat. What is it? First, she began, and I could hear the excitement in her voice. That useless piece of land your father left you? It's not so useless. According to county geological surveys and several discrete inquiries I made, it's sitting on top of one of the largest untapped natural gas deposits in the state. An energy company has been trying to acquire the mineral rights in that area for years. I was speechless. My mind was reeling. What does that mean? It means, Kaylee, she said, slowly, letting it sink in, that your land is conservatively valued at over $12 million. I think I stopped breathing. 12 million? It was an impossible number. But that's not all, Margaret continued. I also uncovered a trust account your father set up for you years before he passed. It's been sitting dormant, collecting interest, because the bank couldn't locate you under your married name. A trust account? I stammered. Your father, it seems, was a remarkably shrewd investor. He was putting away small amounts of money his whole life, investing in smart stocks. With decades of compound interest, Kaylee, that account now holds over $2 million. I finally collapsed into a chair, the phone pressed hard against my ear. It wasn't possible. My father, who wore work boots and packed a lunch every day, was a multimillionaire? And then Margaret told me the final piece. There's a letter from him attached to the trust documents. He wanted you to have it. The divorce proceedings started a month after that call. Marcus walked into the courtroom like he owned the place, flanked by his team of slick, expensive lawyers. He kept shooting me these looks, a mixture of pity and smug satisfaction. He thought this was a done deal. During the initial hearings, his lawyer painted him as the benevolent, long-suffering husband. Your Honor, he'd argue, my client is offering Mrs. Chen a more than generous settlement considering she brought very little into the marriage financially. Marcus would nod along, his face a mask of solemn concern. He was a phenomenal actor, I had to give him that. Following Margaret's advice, we played our cards close to our chest. We didn't mention the land's true value or the trust fund. Let him think he's winning, Margaret had said with a grin. The fall will be that much harder. The final hearing was a cold Thursday morning. Marcus was practically glowing with confidence. Judge Patricia Hendricks, a woman known for her sharp intellect and intolerance for courtroom games, presided. We are here today to finalize the divorce of Marcus and Kaylee Chen. I understand there are some disputed assets. Marcus's lawyer stood. Your Honor, the dispute is minor. My client funded the vast majority of the marital assets. The only significant contribution from Mrs. Chen was a small parcel of undeveloped land which was leveraged as collateral for the marital home. And your client's position on this land, the judge asked? That it be sold to satisfy the remaining mortgage debt, Your Honor.
It's the only equitable solution. Judge Hendricks turned her gaze to me. Mrs. Chen, your response. I stood, my legs trembling slightly, but my voice clear. Your Honor, I believe there has been a significant misunderstanding regarding my inheritance. Margaret rose beside me. Your Honor, we have some new information that is critically relevant to these proceedings. Marcus looked over, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face, but not concern. He still thought this was just a desperate last-ditch effort. Proceed, the judge said. Margaret opened her briefcase. Your Honor, Mrs. Chen's father, Robert Mitchell, left her two primary assets. The first is the land in question. We had it independently appraised. She slid a folder across the table. Recent geological surveys have confirmed it sits on top of one of the largest untapped natural gas deposits in the state. An energy company has been trying to acquire the mineral rights in that area for years.
The sound of Marcus's lawyer's pen clattering onto the floor was the only sound in the dead silent room. The color had completely drained from Marcus's face. He looked like he'd been struck by lightning. Furthermore, Margaret continued, her voice ringing with authority, Mr. Mitchell also established a protected trust for his daughter. That trust, which was designed to remain separate from any marital assets, currently holds a balance of $2,142,000. The judge raised a single eyebrow, her gaze fixed on Marcus. Mr. Chen, were you aware of the value of these assets? Marcus was sputtering, unable to form a coherent sentence. And one more thing, Your Honor, Margaret said, delivering the final blow. We have reason to believe Mr. Chen was not only aware of his wife's potential inheritance, but was actively attempting to defraud her of it. She produced a small digital recorder. We have a recorded phone conversation dated 3 months ago in which Mr. Chen details his plan to obtain his wife's property through these very divorce proceedings, mocking her for being boring and ordinary in the process. Judge Hendricks's face was like stone. Mr. Chen, she said, her voice dangerously quiet, is this true? His lawyer jumped up. Your Honor, we strenuously object. We need a recess to review this ambush. Denied, the judge snapped. We will settle this now. Mrs. Chen, it is clear that the trust and the land are your separate inherited property. You will retain them in their entirety. She then turned the full force of her glare on Marcus. Mr. Chen, the evidence of fraud presented here is deeply disturbing. The prenup you so carefully crafted is hereby declared void. In light of your deception and attempted fraud, I am awarding Mrs. Chen 50% of all remaining marital assets, including the full appraised value of this house. Furthermore, you will be responsible for all of Mrs. Chen's legal fees. As we walked out of the courthouse, I felt lighter than I had in years. Marcus, looking disheveled and frantic, ran to catch up with me in the parking lot. Kaylee, wait, this is all just a huge misunderstanding. I turned to face him, and for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't afraid. I felt nothing but a quiet, powerful calm. No, Marcus, I said. The only misunderstanding was mine. I mistakenly believed you loved me. I do, he pleaded, his eyes wild. No, I said softly. You loved the idea of taking everything from me. You loved feeling powerful by making me feel small. But you were wrong. His face crumpled. Kaylee, please. I heard you, Marcus, I said, my voice unwavering. I heard you tell your friend how you deserved an award for pretending to love someone so boring and ordinary. His face went ashen. He finally understood. Goodbye, Marcus, I said, turning away. By the way, that boring, ordinary teacher you married, she's now worth more than you could ever dream of, and I'm not talking about the money. In the end, it wasn't about the money at all. It was about reclaiming myself. That night, I finally read the letter my father had left me. It was written in his familiar, steady hand. My dearest Kaylee, it began. If you are reading this, it means I'm gone. I want you to know that I have always been so proud of the woman you are. You are kind, smart, and strong. I worried that your good heart might make you a target for those who don't share your values. This money is not a gift, it's a tool. It's a shield to protect you and a foundation for you to build any life you want. Never let anyone make you feel small. You are my greatest treasure. Reading his words, I finally understood. The real inheritance wasn't the millions in the bank. It was the unconditional love and belief of a father who saw my true worth all along. I used the money to start a foundation in his name, providing scholarships for underprivileged students who wanted to become teachers, just like Maria. I finally went back to school and got my master's degree. My life, the one I built for myself, was richer and more fulfilling than any fairy tale Marcus could have ever offered. I learned that the greatest victory isn't about proving your doubters wrong. It's about finally, truly believing in yourself.